Pull your phone out of your pocket. Take a look at your sneakers. Look inside your fridge or press a button on your TV remote. There is a 1 in 3 chance that all of it passed through one of 3 cities on the Chinese coast. Just think about it. 1 out of every 3 things around you has definitely been to these places. And we are not talking about the actual manufacturing in the country's factories. We are talking about logistics. This is where all of it was shipped from to get to you. And it is the same with any product on the planet. And if something goes wrong in any of these cities tomorrow, the prices for all these things will instantly skyrocket. Which, by the way, has already happened when a single worker at a terminal tested positive for COVID. But more on that later. So why does a third of the world's logistics depend on just 3 Chinese cities? Why does the global economy risk losing billions of dollars with any major disruption? Let's break it down. To understand why the whole world is so dependent on 3 Chinese cities, you first need to understand what a modern port really is. Most people have a pretty simple picture in their heads. A pier by the water, a few cranes, cargo ships along the shore. In reality, though, the largest ports have long since become self-contained cities with their own infrastructure, roads, rail lines, control centers, and non-stop around-the-clock movement. Most of the things that surround us every day cross the sea at some point in their journey. Phones, home appliances, clothes, furniture, building materials. If a product does not need to be delivered urgently, it is almost always sent in a container on a cargo ship. Despite the development of aviation and high-speed logistics, sea freight still remains the cheapest way to move huge volumes of cargo between continents. At the heart of this whole system lies an object that looks surprisingly unremarkable: a standard metal container. However, it is considered one of the most important inventions in the history of world trade. Before it came along, goods were loaded piece by piece. Crates, sacks, boxes, barrels. Today, a container can be taken off a ship, put on a train, then onto a truck, and sent on its way without ever being opened on the road. It was this simple solution that made it possible to reduce shipping costs many times over in recent decades. Goods that were previously unprofitable to transport across the ocean have turned into the most common consumer products, and manufacturing gained the ability to move to wherever it is cheapest to set up. In many ways, it was the container that made the world we live in possible, a world where a smartphone is designed in one country, assembled in another, and sold in a third. When you start looking at a map of world trade, you pretty quickly get a strange feeling. We're used to thinking that the global economy is spread out across thousands of cities and millions of businesses. But the deeper you dive into the actual flow of goods, the more the same few spots keep catching your eye. Some places turn out to be disproportionately important compared to the rest of the world. One of these places is Shanghai. It's a huge metropolis at the mouth of the Yangtze River, surrounded by one of the largest industrial zones on the planet. Thousands of factories operate here, making everything from home appliances to the most complex electronics. The volume of cargo that moves through this region every day is so colossal that even industry experts can barely wrap their heads around it. A little further south is Ningbo. For most people, this is just an unfamiliar name somewhere on a map of China. But for global logistics, it's one of the most critical hubs on the entire planet. This is where transportation routes from a huge number of the country's industrial districts converge. For many companies around the world, Ningbo is as essential to their business as their own warehouse or production line. The third place is the city of Shenzhen. Its story is particularly telling. Just a couple of decades ago, it was a pretty ordinary city not far from Hong Kong. Now, it has transformed into one of the world's leading technology centers and a key link in international maritime trade. A massive amount of electronics, machinery, and everyday consumer goods passes through this region. What's much more surprising here isn't the size of these cities themselves. Many countries around the world have large ports. The real question is something else. Why is it that 3 ports, all belonging to a single country, have managed to attract such a large share of world trade that any significant event in one of them instantly impacts companies in other parts of the globe? The answer doesn't start at the docks themselves. It lies in the factories, the rail hubs, the distribution centers, and in the strategic decisions China made for decades. A strong port isn't created the moment new cranes are installed. A port becomes strong when a powerful, continuous flow of goods builds up around it. If you look at China at the end of the 20th century, it becomes obvious that the country had the same factors people talk about even now. A huge population, a rapidly developing industry, and relatively low production costs. But these factors alone don't make a country a global factory. Goods don't just need to be made. They need to be delivered to the customer quickly and affordably. This is precisely why China began creating not just individual factories, but entire industrial clusters. One factory makes the casings for smartphones. Another produces the batteries. A third manufactures the displays. A fourth assembles the finished devices. This whole chain is located compactly enough that components can be passed between businesses with almost no delays. When I dove into this topic, one fact really struck me. People often talk about Chinese industry as one gigantic factory, but in reality, it's more like a massive ecosystem. Thousands of companies operate independently, but they're so closely interconnected that from the outside, they look like a single machine. Imagine a refrigerator manufacturer. In one country, they might have to order parts from different suppliers in various regions, and sometimes even other countries. In China, however, many of the necessary components are just a few hours' drive away. This cuts down on costs, speeds up production, and makes the entire chain much more efficient and predictable. After the assembly stage, the next process begins. The finished products aren't just sent to the port, they enter a logistics system that has been built up over decades with one single goal: to move large volumes of goods as quickly as possible, from the factory to the ship and on to the consumer on the other side of the world. This is precisely the point where a manufacturing advantage becomes a logistics advantage. This is exactly why the largest shipping companies from all over the world continue to prefer the Chinese coast. For them, it's not just about the volume of cargo. What matters is the speed of vessel processing, the availability of routes, the reliability of supplies, and the predictability of the entire supply chain. In international trade, stability is often valued more than speed. Over time, an interesting mechanism kicks in. The more cargo that passes through a port, the wider the network of new routes becomes. The more routes that open up, the more attractive that port becomes for manufacturers. And the closer the industry is to the port, the faster the cargo flow increases. Such a system begins to reinforce itself. This is China's main advantage. A new player can build a modern terminal, buy the equipment, and even offer lower rates. But they can't create such a dense network of industry, logistics, and business connections, which took several decades to form, in just a few years. From the outside, it seems like an almost natural course of events. It seems that these three ports just got luckier than the others. But with a more detailed analysis of the numbers and routes of world trade, it becomes obvious that behind this are decades of infrastructure construction and millions of decisions that turned a few Chinese coastal cities into key hubs of the global economy. Many countries have tried to replicate this success and continue to do so now. India is building deep-water terminals and expanding its transportation network. The Persian Gulf states are investing billions in logistics hubs. But this is where a problem arises that can't be solved with money alone. Imagine a modern airport in the middle of a desert. You can build a perfect runway. Constructing a terminal and installing the most advanced equipment would be no trouble at all. But if there isn't a major city nearby, passengers won't fly there. The situation with ports is pretty much the same. For decades, China has been building not just port infrastructure, but an entire ecosystem around it. Manufacturing plants sprang up in close proximity to transportation hubs. Railroad tracks were laid with the needs of industrial zones in mind. Warehouse complexes appeared exactly where cargo turnover was growing. Each subsequent investment multiplied the effect of the previous one. Looking at this from the outside, it's easy to think it all just happened by chance. However, behind every single shipping container are thousands of decisions made many years before. That's precisely why the current dominance of the Chinese coast is seen not as a coincidence, but as the logical outcome of a very long and deliberate policy. At the same time, this kind of concentration has a flip side. The more the global economy is tied to a few key logistics hubs, the more painful any disruption to their operations becomes. And the threat doesn't just come from major disasters. Sometimes, an event that seems completely insignificant at first is all it takes. Most people first encountered this vulnerability during the pandemic. Until then, logistics was taken for granted, something that just happened. The containers kept moving. The ships arrived on schedule. The store shelves were never empty. The colossal system worked so smoothly that people simply stopped noticing it even existed. And then, at one of the largest ports on the planet, an event occurred that clearly showed just how interconnected the modern world is. It all started with just one single person, and it ended with rising prices, supply disruptions, and serious difficulties for companies on the other side of the globe. In the summer of 2021, an employee at the port of Ningbo tested positive for coronavirus. To an outside observer, the news seemed completely unremarkable. One worker, one terminal, not the whole port, and certainly not the entire city. It seemed impossible that a story like this could have any noticeable impact on global trade. However, logistics plays by a different set of rules. A modern port is like an incredibly complex machine, made up of thousands of interdependent parts. As long as each of them is working in its designated rhythm, the whole system appears reliable and stable. But the moment you shut down one crucial section, the load starts getting redistributed to the neighboring links. And very quickly, the scale of the problem becomes completely out of proportion to the cause that created it. The terminal's operations came to a halt. Containers began to fill up all the available space. Ships scheduled to arrive had to wait their turn. Some carriers started looking for alternative routes. The rest decided to just wait it out. Within just a few days, the delay had grown beyond the scope of a single port's problem. Maritime logistics is structured in a way that it runs on a very tight schedule. A vessel doesn't just shuttle between two destinations. It follows a long route, making sequential stops at ports in several countries. If a ship gets off schedule today, it will still be running late a week from now. Sometimes the consequences of such a shift are felt for many months to come. Imagine a long line of cars on the freeway. One of the drivers slams on their brakes. In just a few seconds, a ripple effect of braking spreads through hundreds of cars behind them. Something similar happens with ports, only instead of cars, you have container ships, several hundred meters long, and the cargo on board is valued in the millions of dollars. A few weeks later, the consequences made themselves felt far beyond China. Manufacturers reported delays in component shipments. Importers pushed back their deadlines. Some companies were surprised to find that the goods they needed did physically exist, but they were nowhere near where they were supposed to be, according to the plan. It was at that moment that many people truly felt the real cost of high efficiency. The more fine-tuned a system is, the more its parts depend on one another. As long as everything goes according to plan, this brings colossal benefits. But as soon as a failure occurs, the problem begins to spread through the very connections that made the system so effective. What struck me in this story was something else entirely. Millions of people were discussing inflation, shortages of certain goods, and the rising cost of shipping. However, most of them had no idea that some of these processes originated from events at a single terminal in a Chinese port, a place whose very name many had never even heard before. However, Ningbo turned out to be far from the only warning sign. Around the same period, the world received an even more graphic lesson in just how vulnerable global logistics can be. And this time, what was happening was seen even by those who had never been interested in freight transportation before. The massive container ship Ever Given ran aground in the Suez Canal. In the pictures, it all looked almost comical. A tiny excavator next to the vessel's gigantic hull. But behind that image was a problem that cost the global economy billions of dollars and held up the movement of hundreds of ships. What was especially striking was the gap between the cause and the scale of the consequences. A single vessel physically blocked a small section of a waterway, and the repercussions of this event started to ripple across the entire planet. In moments like these, you clearly realize just how much the modern economy hinges on a few vulnerable spots on the world map. Then there are the typhoons. Every season, they slam the coast of East Asia and force ports to partially suspend operations. For most people, it is just news about bad weather somewhere on the other side of the world. For logistics operators, it is an alarm bell, signaling that in a few weeks, some shipments will inevitably be delayed. The worst part is that delays almost never stay where they started. A container that was not loaded today pushes another shipment out tomorrow. A ship that is late to one port will just as inevitably be late to the next. Gradually, a small disruption snowballs into a long chain of problems. This is precisely why the world's largest companies are watching the situation in Shanghai, Ningbo, and Shenzhen so closely. This has long stopped being just about Chinese ports. These cities have turned into hubs, and the smooth operation of a huge number of businesses around the world depends on their uninterrupted work. And this brings up a question that sounds completely logical. If the dependence is so great, why has a full-fledged alternative still not been created? Why does global trade continue to concentrate more and more cargo flows in this particular region, fully aware of all the associated risks? The answer turns out to be way more interesting than you might think at first glance, because the problem hasn't been about the ports for a long time now, or even the ships. The real reason lies in how the very structure of the global economy has changed over the last few decades. For a long time, the prevailing belief was that you could move production from one country to another pretty quickly. If costs got too high somewhere, companies would just find a new spot. On paper, it all looks convincing. But reality turned out to be infinitely more complex. Because modern manufacturing long ago stopped being just a collection of independent factories. Imagine a company that makes washing machines. You need motors, electronics, plastic, metal, rubber seals, packaging, and dozens of other components for a single product. Each one is manufactured at a separate facility, and each facility depends on dozens of its own suppliers. What ends up growing is not just a factory, but a full-fledged industrial ecosystem. Hundreds of companies become so tightly intertwined that they function like a single living organism. If you take out one link, the others will keep working for a little while. However, their efficiency will start to plummet. That's why today many goods are technically manufactured in various Asian countries, but they still remain closely tied to China's industrial infrastructure. A factory might be located in Vietnam or Indonesia, but a significant portion of its components is still sourced from Chinese regions concentrated around the major ports. A curious picture is emerging. Some companies are genuinely trying to reduce their dependence on China, but it often turns out they're only changing the final assembly address, while most of the production chain stays right where it was. On the outside, it looks like the system has changed. On the inside, it continues to operate almost exactly as it did before. When you start breaking down these supply chains step by step, it becomes clear why new competitors are so slow to appear. It's not enough to just build a pier and buy some cranes. You have to replicate the vast network of connections between thousands of businesses that has been built up over decades. This is precisely why a conversation about competition between ports often turns into a conversation about competition between entire economic models. One port might be more modern, another deeper, a third better located geographically. But if they don't have a comparable industrial scale behind them, any advantage quickly evaporates. For the average person, all of this remains invisible for a long time. We rarely think about the journey a product takes before it ends up on a store shelf. We tend to think that everything important happens at the factory, when in reality, half the success of modern manufacturing is determined by how quickly and predictably the finished product gets to the customer. That's precisely why a rise in shipping costs almost always gets reflected in the final price of a product. Not instantly, not to the same degree for all categories, but it does. Manufacturers can absorb some of the costs for a while, but they can't do that forever. Sometimes the changes are practically unnoticeable. A few percent here, a few percent there. But when you're talking about millions of containers and thousands of companies, even minor fluctuations turn into some seriously impressive amounts of money. The funny thing is that people usually blame price hikes on anything but logistics, on inflation, on currency exchange rates, on the decisions of the manufacturers themselves. Even though part of the answer might be hiding thousands of miles away from the store, somewhere among the container terminals on the shores of the East China Sea. The deeper I got into this topic, the more my own perception of global trade changed. Before, it seemed like something abstract, a set of charts, reports, and economic terms. But behind all these numbers, some very tangible places suddenly emerged. Places that have a real impact on the lives of billions of people. Shanghai, Ningbo, and Shenzhen look like just regular dots on a map. But in a way, they are some of the most important hubs of modern civilization. Goods that end up in apartments, stores, hospitals, offices, and factories all over the globe pass through them. And the most remarkable thing here isn't even the scale of the ports themselves. It's not the millions of containers or the value of the cargo that passes through them. Another observation is far more striking. We're used to thinking of the modern world as incredibly complex and spread out. But the closer you look at it, the more you notice an astonishing concentration of everything in just a few key spots. Most people will never see these ports with their own eyes. They'll never find themselves among the endless rows of containers and giant cranes. But almost every single person uses the results of their work every day. And in that, perhaps, lies the main paradox of this whole story. Because the stability of our familiar way of life sometimes depends on places whose names most people couldn't find on a map. And things that seem completely ordinary and accessible often travel through one of the most immense systems ever built by humankind. The next time you pick up your phone, turn on the TV, or open the fridge, on the surface, everything will be the same as always. But now you'll know that somewhere far away on the Chinese coast, 3 cities that never stop are running. And without them, the familiar face of the modern world would look completely different.